Hi, this is Scott, the Tall Woodworker. Welcome to my shop. In this video, I'm going to create a jig that will allow me to cut a straight line on a board if I don't have a straight edge to use my fence for. Stick around and let's get building. So I have an idea for a project that I want to do that's going to be using some rough sawn lumber. The problem is that because it's not surfaced on any of the edges, I don't have the ability to safely run the edges through my table saw and get my straight lines. Because my fence is straight but the edge of the board is not, as I make the cut, there's a chance that it could pinch the board between the blade and the fence, and that could cause some dangerous kickback. By creating a sled that has its own straight edge, in this case I'm actually going to be using the miter slot, I'll be able to lay my board on top of the jig, run it through the table saw, and have a nice straight edge down one side. So we're going to be assembling this using a sheet of 3/4 inch bolted birch plywood. Because of my table saw's limitations, I have to build my own runners, and I'm going to be using some hickory in order to do that. I've used hickory as runners on my previous crosscut sled. I've had that thing for 2 years, never had any issues with it. So for me, this has been a really good good stabilized hardwood to use as my runners. In addition, in order to clamp the board that I'm working on to the jig, I'm going to be installing some T-track rails horizontally on the jig and then use clamps to hold it down. Before I get going though, if you like my videos, please hit the like button. It really helps my growing channel, and I hope that you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell notification so that you know when I post new videos. I don't have any type of schedule as to when I'm posting videos, so it's the best way to know if I've posted something new. I'm going to get you in a little bit closer because there's some details I want to show about my specific table saw. So I have a skill saw table saw. It's a very basic table saw. But one of the disadvantages on this one is this miter slot is not your standard width. If you happen to have a table saw that uses standard width miter slots, you can actually go out and buy your own miter bars that are designed to fit through here. But this, being a standard size miter bar, will not fit. So that's why I have to make my own out of wood. My first step is to I'm going to use my planer to reduce the thickness of this board so that it fits inside my miter slot and can slide nicely without having any play. It's going to be a little bit tricky to get it to that fine point. We're going to be making several passes to the planer and back until we get it dialed in just right. Alright, so that took about 6 or 7 passes through the planer in order to bring this down to the proper thickness, and now that fits in here really nicely. There is no side to side play, or very little I could say, so that's going to be nice and straight. So that I've already gone ahead and measured now the depth of my miter slot, so we're going to cut this strip into to leave off the thickness. We don't want it to be the full height. We want to leave a little bit of air underneath it, just in case any sawdust gets trapped in here or anything like that. It doesn't cause any issues. So the depth of this is about 1/4 inch. I've done it to about 2/10 of an inch, technically 1/5 of an inch, is what I've figured that I should measure this to. Now, because my table saw doesn't have a zero clearance insert, I don't want to be bringing my fence all the way up to it and making repeated cuts that way. So for safety reasons, I do have to measure so that I have, so that after I make my cut, my bar is going to be on the waist side of my fence. Okay, now that we got that cut, that sits in there very nicely, nice and flush. There's a little bit of a dip, so this actually became a really nice miter bar. So let's go ahead and get this attached to the sled. so now it's time to attach our miter bar to our jig. And what I've done here is I've put a couple of dimes inside my miter track, and that's going to allow it so that when I place my miter bar on here, it raises it up just slightly above the surface. That way I know I have positive contact between my rail and the board. What we're going to do is apply a very thin amount of glue onto our rail here, put the board on top of it. I have my fence here for nothing more than just to kind of sort of align it. The nice thing about this jig is we're not going to be using any type of fence or anything like that on the jig itself. The miter slot becomes the guide. So no matter how I clamp my finished board onto the jig, as long as I line it up with the edge of the board, that's where the cut's going to happen. So I did move my my fence here just slightly over, so it will cut some of the edge. We'll be creating a nice clean zero clearance edge on this board once everything is all said and done. Going to apply a few weights on top of it just to give it some extra clamping pressure. But while we're doing that, I'm going to pull this out and actually start pre-drilling and drilling some screws into this. Now that we got some screws in here, we can go ahead and drill a few more holes and get a few more screws in just to secure it down. Okay, so now that we have our miter runner on here, I want to hit it with the shoulder plane really quickly to do one of two things. Number one, there's a little bit of glue squeeze out, although I might not want to use my plane for that. I'm going to grab a screwdriver. But also, I want to put a slight chamfer on the very edge of this. Right now it's very sharp, very pointy, and I want to be able to give it a way of easing into the miter slot. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a plane just to take off a little bit. And that should help it so that I can just drop it right into the miter slot and be ready to go. Gonna do a little bit of sanding on here, and for the most part, the wood part is done. The next step that we'll be doing is cutting in the holes for the T-track. Okay, so unfortunately I did not record the actual cutting of these dados, but I basically used my router table to cut a wide enough and deep enough groove to fit my pieces of the T-track. The only problem that I'm going to have with this is I don't have any screws that are meant to go through just this and the remaining 1/4 of an inch that's remaining. So I'm going to have to drill them in and then use some pliers to snip them off and then kind of sand them down a bit just to make sure that the metal doesn't scratch up my table saw surface. Okay, before we go for its first run, we're going to go ahead and apply some paste wax onto here. And we're all set. We are ready to make our first cuts into here. Basically, we're gonna run this through as far as it'll go. I do have a stop point because of how my workbench is set up, but I do know that it should get me through this side of the aluminum, and that'll let me know the surface area I have to work with. And we can trim off this excess bit with a simple pull saw. So now what I can do is use some T-track hold downs such as these. And that will give me the ability to clamp a board to this sled and cut a straight line right through it. And there you go. So while that demonstration cut that I did isn't a typical cut to make, you can see that I did cut a nice taper on this using my straight line jig just by having it clamped to one bar. This created a nice straight cut without having to reference another fence. Some upgrades that I might want to do to this: number one, potentially put another T-track in here going right down the middle of it. That way when I do have shorter boards, I don't have to rely just on a single clamp. So that's probably upgrade number one. Upgrade number two is what I can do is create a straight edge that goes all the way down here. Then using that as a fence, I could actually create a repeatable taper jig. Well, I was able to create a taper on this board. It's not repeatable. When I put the next board on here, I'd have to do some really good lining up. Anytime you can use a stop block, it's always repeatable, and that's always more preferred. So this does have a dual functionality sometime in the future if I ever needed to do more tapers just like this one. So, but for my use cases that I need right now, this is going to be absolutely perfect to get a straight edge onto an otherwise non-straight board. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and you learned something from here. If you did, please, please, please hit that thumbs up button below the video. I'm trying to grow my channel and the thumbs ups really do help. And also be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon. That bell icon is how you get notified anytime I post new videos. And you should do that for your other YouTube channels that you really do enjoy watching. Until next time, thanks for joining me in my shop, and I'll see you next time.